Hi there. Welcome to Dreamy Histories channel. Tonight, we're floating through the canals of Renaissance Venice, where the scent of salt water mingles with perfume, and every whispered sweet nothing echoes off marble palaces for the whole neighborhood to hear. You're about to discover why finding love in 16th century Venice was less like a private romance and more like staging a Broadway show where your future mother-in-law directs. The church writes the script, and every gondolier in the city knows your business before you do. Just a heads up, if you think modern dating apps are brutal, you probably wouldn't last a week in Venice's public courtship arena, where one wrong glance could mean social exile or worse. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight. Drop your location and local time in the comments below. Let's settle in and get started. You're standing on a narrow bridge over a Venetian canal. The year is 1550, and the city sprawls before you like a floating theatre designed by an architect who clearly had too much wine. Venice isn't just built on water, it's built on reputation, gossip, and the constant performance of being seen. Every palazzo window frames potential drama, every gondola carries whispered secrets, and every public square hosts the daily soap opera of Venetian social life. The thing about Venice is that privacy simply doesn't exist here, not when your neighbor's bedroom window is close enough that you could pass them a cup of sugar without leaving your house. You quickly learn that in this aquatic maze, dating isn't something you do. It's something you perform for an audience that never bought tickets but always has opinions. The city's unique architecture, with its bridges, balconies, and campos, those charming little squares, creates natural amphitheaters where romantic dramas unfold whether you want them to or not. Historians still debate whether Venetians deliberately designed their city for maximum gossip efficiency or if it just worked out that way. But either way, trying to keep a secret love affair here is like trying to keep a secret in a fishbowl. The Venetian Republic has turned matchmaking into a state-regulated industry more complex than their famous glass-blowing guilds. You discover that every aspect of courtship, from the first meaningful glance to the wedding night, follows scripts written by a combination of government decree, church law, and neighborhood tradition. The mainstream historical fact that surprises most people is that Venice actually had official registers for marriageable young people. Think of it as a Renaissance dating database managed by stern clerks who definitely judge your choices. Your modern mind reels as you realize that Venetian parents treat their children's romantic lives like investment portfolios, complete with risk assessments and profit projections. Love? That's a luxury item, like those imported spices from the Orient. What matters is alliance, property, and maintaining the delicate social ecosystem that keeps this impossible city from sinking into the lagoon, metaphorically and literally. The quirky tidbit that even historians find amusing is that some Venetian families kept detailed journals rating potential suitors using a point system that would make modern dating apps look positively romantic. You watch as young nobles parade through the Piazza San Marco, their every gesture calculated for maximum visibility. The women wear chopines, those ridiculously tall platform shoes that can add up to 20 inches to their height, not just for fashion, but to ensure they can be seen over the crowds. Meanwhile, young men practice their bows in mirrors, perfecting the exact angle that suggests interest without commitment. It's exhausting just watching them, and you haven't even gotten to the complicated hand fan signals yet. The morning sun catches on 1,000 windows as you lean against a marble balcony railing, watching the daily theatre of Venetian romance unfold below. These balconies, you realize, aren't just architectural flourishes. They're advertising platforms where families display their marriageable assets like merchants showing silk in shop windows. Every carved stone balustrade and ornate iron grille serves a dual purpose, keeping young women safely contained while ensuring they remain tantalizingly visible to potential suitors passing by on foot or gondola. You notice how the geography of desire maps itself onto Venice's vertical architecture. The primo piano nobile, that's the main floor where the wealthy families live, positions eligible daughters at the perfect height for stolen glances and dropped handkerchiefs. Too high, and subtle facial expressions get lost. Too low, and you're mingling with the merchant class, heaven forbid. The mainstream historical record shows that Venetian architects actually consulted with matchmakers when designing palazzo facades, ensuring optimal sight lines for courtship rituals. The balcony performances follow unspoken rules more rigid than any military drill. Between the hours of late afternoon promenade and evening vespers, young women appear at their designated spots, always chaperoned, always perfectly positioned to catch the light. They engage in elaborate needlework, not because anyone needs another embroidered cushion, but because it provides an excuse to sit outside while maintaining the fiction of productivity. You watch one girl accidentally drop her silk thread for the third time in 10 minutes, each retrieval requiring her to lean forward just enough to display her décolletage to a young man who's been circling the canal like a well-dressed shark. The bizarre truth that makes even seasoned historians chuckle is that some Venetian families installed hidden pulleys and platforms behind their balconies, allowing them to literally elevate or lower their daughters based on the quality of passing suitors. Think of it as Renaissance elevator pitching, except the product is your eldest daughter, and the elevator is operated by your grandmother, who has very strong opinions about that merchant family from Murano. You're startled by the sudden appearance of flowering pots along every balcony rail. Apparently, it's courtship season, and specific flowers send coded messages visible from canal level. Red carnations suggest availability. White roses indicate serious negotiations are underway. And heaven help the girl whose mother displays yellow chrysanthemums. That's basically hanging a damaged goods sign on your romantic prospects. The neighborhood matrons patrol the canals in their gondolas, taking careful note of which flowers appear where, updating their mental databases of who's pursuing whom. What really gets you is the acoustic engineering of these romantic displays. Venice's narrow canals and high walls create perfect echo chambers, ensuring that every flirtatious giggle, every accidental sigh, carries to precisely the right ears, and several dozen wrong ones. Historians still argue whether Venetian builders understood acoustics this well, or just got lucky, but the result is the same. Privacy is an illusion, and your neighbor 3 houses down knows exactly how your courtship is progressing based on the frequency of your balcony appearances. The professional matchmakers, those cunning operators who make modern dating coaches look like amateurs, maintain detailed charts of which balconies offer the best angles for specific times of day. They rent out strategic viewing positions during peak courtship hours, turning romance into a spectator sport with premium seating. You overhear one matchmaker instructing a client, "Stand by the 3rd bridge pillar at exactly 4 bells. The sun will backlight her perfectly." And her crusty old aunt takes a nap then. Young men develop elaborate strategies to pass by the right balconies at the right times, hiring musicians to provide cover, bringing unnecessary deliveries to neighboring houses, or suddenly developing deep friendships with anyone who lives nearby. The desperation is palpable, the execution often comedic. You witness one Romeo wannabe trying to coordinate 3 different gondoliers to create a traffic jam beneath his beloved's window, only to discover she's visiting her cousin in Padua. The balcony as billboard reaches its peak absurdity during marriage negotiations, when families literally hang tapestries displaying their wealth and connections for all to see. It's like LinkedIn profiles made of silk and gold thread, except everyone in the neighborhood gets to comment on your endorsements. The women continue their performances, but now with the added pressure of knowing their market value is being publicly calculated by every busybody with a view. You step carefully into a sleek black gondola, immediately realizing you've entered a floating minefield of social protocols that make modern dating rules look refreshingly simple. The gondolier, dressed in his striped shirt and knowing smirk, sizes you up instantly. He's seen enough romantic disasters to write a book, though he'd probably be assassinated by half the noble families in Venice if he did. These boats aren't just transportation. They're mobile courtship chambers with more rules than a monastery and more gossip potential than a hairdresser's salon. The seating arrangements alone could spark a diplomatic incident. An unmarried woman can only share a gondola with a man if accompanied by at least 2 chaperones, preferably elderly aunts with eagle eyes and sharp tongues. The cushions must be arranged to maintain maximum distance, exactly 3 handspans apart, measured by the chaperone before departure. You watch as one unfortunate couple attempts to board, only for the grandmother to whip out an actual measuring stick, sending the young man to a different bench entirely. The mainstream historical fact that surprises most people is that Venice actually employed official gondola inspectors who could issue fines for improper seating arrangements. The routes taken through Venice's waterways follow scripts more predictable than a bad romance novel. Serious courtship requires passage under the Bridge of Sighs exactly at sunset, when the light turns the water to liquid gold and theoretically makes everyone look more attractive. Lesser suitors get stuck with midday runs past the fish market, where the romantic ambience of rotting seafood really sets the mood. You notice how gondoliers communicate through elaborate whistles and calls, warning each other about which noble daughters are aboard and which protective fathers are lurking on nearby bridges with crossbows. The quirky detail that makes historians giggle is the existence of courtship gondolas, specially modified boats with built-in chaperone seats, strategic sight-blocking curtains, and even small bells that ring if the boat rocks too vigorously. Some entrepreneurial gondoliers offered package deals, 2 hours of chaperone canal touring, a pre-approved route past acceptable landmarks, and a written testimony of proper behavior suitable for showing to suspicious parents. Think of it as Uber for unrequited love, complete with ratings and reviews whispered at confessional. You're amazed by the sheer theatricality of gondola courtship. Young men hire multiple boats to create aquatic processions, with musicians in the lead gondola, gift-bearers in the second, and the actual suitor bringing up the rear like some sort of maritime peacock display. The expense is astronomical. You calculate that one of these elaborate water parades costs more than a skilled craftsman earns in a year. Meanwhile, young women pretend to be surprised by these chance encounters, despite having coordinated every detail through a network of servants, cousins, and sympathetic fishmongers. The gondoliers themselves become key players in Venice's romantic dramas. These men know every scandal, every affair, every failed proposal in the city. They develop loyalty to specific families, becoming aquatic cupids who mysteriously develop engine problems at convenient moments or accidentally take routes that just happen to pass by rival suitors at unflattering times. Historians still debate whether the Gondoliers Guild had an official matchmaking division or if it just operated as an open secret. But either way, choosing the wrong gondolier could sink your romantic prospects faster than you could say amour. The most mortifying aspect of gondola courtship is the public nature of rejection. When a young woman wishes to discourage a suitor, she doesn't need to speak. She simply trails her handkerchief in the water as his gondola passes, a gesture visible to everyone within 100 yards. You witness one poor soul receive the aquatic handkerchief treatment from 3 different women in a single afternoon, his gondolier sympathetically steering him toward the wine shops of Cannaregio, where rejected suitors go to drown their publicly witnessed sorrows. Weather adds another layer of complexity to gondola romance. Rain transforms carefully arranged hair into sodden disasters. Wind makes conversation impossible, and the summer sun turns black gondolas into floating ovens that could roast a chicken. Yet courtship must continue. You see desperate lovers huddled under inadequate parasols, chaperones grimly enduring seasickness, and one memorable couple attempting to exchange passionate glances while both actively fighting off aggressive seagulls attracted by the romantic picnic they'd foolishly brought along. The explosion of fireworks above San Marco announces the beginning of Carnival, and you suddenly understand why Venice's matchmaking season reaches fever pitch during these weeks of sanctioned madness. Behind your own elaborate mask, let's say you've chosen the classic Bauta, that ghostly white face that makes everyone look vaguely sinister. You feel the intoxicating anonymity that transforms the city's rigid courtship rules into something far more dangerous and delicious. The masks don't just hide faces. They temporarily dissolve the social barriers that normally keep merchant daughters from flirting with noble sons, or married women from dancing with mysterious strangers. You navigate through the pressed crowds in the piazza, where the usual dating surveillance system breaks down completely. Those gossiping neighbors who normally track every romantic glance. They can't tell if that's you or your cousin under that feathered contraption. The mainstream historical records show that marriage contracts signed within 3 months after Carnival were 40% more likely to involve surprising matches between different social classes, surprising only to people who didn't realize that the banker's daughter and the duke's son had been meeting secretly behind matching Colombina masks. The genius of Carnival courtship lies in its plausible deniability. Was that me dancing with your betrothed until dawn? Impossible to say. There were at least 12 other people wearing the exact same mask. You watch as young nobles use this ambiguity to test romantic waters without risking their reputations. They drop hints about their identity, a family ring worn outside their gloves, a distinctive way of laughing, perfume that costs more than a gondolier's yearly salary, creating a romantic puzzle for potential partners to solve. It's like speed dating crossed with an escape room, except the stakes include your entire future happiness and possibly exile. Here's the bizarre historical tidbit that makes even jaded researchers smile. Some Venetian mask makers operated as underground matchmakers, creating secretly matching masks for couples who wanted to identify each other in crowds. They'd craft tiny, unique details, a specific pattern of gold leaf, a hidden symbol that allowed lovers to find each other while maintaining anonymity from everyone else. These mask makers kept coded records that historians still puzzle over, trying to decode which dolphin and moon combination belonged to which doomed Romeo and Juliet. You stumble into one of the private ridotti, those gambling houses where masked figures play cards for stakes that include more than money. The password to enter changes nightly, whispered by gondoliers to those deemed worthy. Inside, the air thick with smoke and perfume. You realize these aren't just gambling dens. They're audition spaces where potential spouses display wit, nerve, and financial recklessness in equal measure. A young woman in a cat mask consistently wins at Basetta, proving she has both mathematical skills and steady nerves. Her growing pile of gold coins attracts masks to tutunlusos, suitors like moths to an extremely expensive flame. The dance floors become battlegrounds of desire where the usual rules evaporate like morning mist over the lagoon. The Falana, that supposedly peasant dance that nobles perform while pretending to be commoners pretending to be nobles. Venice loves its layers. Allows for physical contact that would normally require 3 priests and a signed contract. You watch couples communicate entire romantic narratives through dance. The way she turns her head during the third measure means yes, while stepping on his foot during the finale definitely means stop sending your awful poetry to my balcony. Historians still argue whether Carnival's temporary social chaos strengthened or weakened Venice's rigid marriage system. What's undeniable is that these weeks of masked encounters created a safety valve for a society wound tighter than a Swiss watch. Young people who spent 11 months performing perfect propriety suddenly had permission to be wild, mysterious, dangerous, as long as they could maintain plausible deniability. Come Ash Wednesday, the sheer number of premature births 9 months after Carnival suggests that some masks slipped more than others. The most pathetic and hilarious sights are the desperate suitors who haven't mastered mask etiquette. You spot one poor fool who clearly practiced his mysterious persona in front of a mirror, but forgot that mystery requires not tripping over your own cape every third step. Another keeps lifting his mask to wipe sweat, completely defeating the purpose while his intended paramour pretends not to notice she's being courted by the fishmonger's cross-eyed son. The learning curve is steep, and the canal waters are littered with the romantic hopes of those who thought a mask alone would transform them into Casanova. You find yourself in the cluttered office of Signora Benedetta Zorzi, one of Venice's most formidable marriage brokers, and the smell of old parchment mixed with cat urine immediately makes you question your life choices. She eyes you like a butcher evaluating a questionable cut of meat, already calculating your market value based on your posture, dental health, and the quality of your shoe leather. These professional matchmakers, or sensali di matrimoni, operate with the ruthless efficiency of commodity traders because in Venice, that's exactly what they are, except their commodity happens to be your romantic future. The entire marriage broker network functions like a Renaissance LinkedIn crossed with a spy agency. Signora Zorzi pulls out leather-bound ledgers containing detailed dossiers on every marriageable person in Venice, complete with financial assessments, family scandals going back 3 generations, and coded notes about physical defects that might affect breeding potential. The mainstream historical fact that shocks modern readers is that these brokers were officially licensed by the Venetian government and could be fined or imprisoned for making false claims about a client's virginity, wealth, or dental hygiene. You watch in fascination as she deploys her network of informants, servants, gondoliers, fruit sellers, and most terrifyingly, other people's grandmothers. Within minutes of expressing interest in someone, she's already dispatching messages through a communication system that makes the internet look slow. Her nephew runs to check property records. Her cousin investigates gambling debts. And her ancient mother-in-law somehow materializes with a full report on the target's family's medical history, including that unfortunate incident with the mad uncle who thought he was a pigeon. The weird historical detail that makes even academics snort with laughter is that marriage brokers often operated in partnerships with doctors who specialized in virginity verification and fertility assessment. These medical professionals, and I use that term loosely, would conduct examinations that involved everything from urine analysis to checking for lustful moles in unfortunate locations. Signora Zorzi keeps their reports in a locked cabinet, bringing them out with the reverence usually reserved for holy relics. "This one," she says, tapping a document with one gnarled finger, "certified intact but prone to hysterics, requires careful handling." The negotiation process resembles a fish market where the fish have feelings and trust funds. Brokers represent both sides while somehow maintaining loyalty to neither, extracting maximum profit from everyone's desperation. You observe as Signora Zorzi simultaneously tells a young man's family that their son is Venice's most eligible bachelor, fought over by duchesses, while informing a potential bride's family that he's adequate, bit of a gambling problem. But beggars can't be choosers. The cognitive dissonance required for this job explains why most marriage brokers drink wine like it's water and water like it's poison. These brokers maintain vast intelligence networks that would make modern social media stalkers weep with envy. They know who's secretly bankrupt, whose eldest daughter isn't actually the father's child, and which noble families are one bad harvest away from selling their palazzo. The information trades hands like currency. A juicy scandal about the Grimaldi family might be worth overlooking a small dowry discrepancy, while confirmed virginity could add 20% to the asking price. Historians still debate whether these brokers prevented more disasters than they caused, but everyone agrees they made the process enormously more entertaining for bystanders. The broker's cut typically runs 2 to 3% of the dowry, which sounds reasonable until you realize some dowries could buy a fleet of ships. This incentivizes them to aim high, creating absurd mismatches that somehow occasionally work out. You witness Signora Zorzi attempting to pair a wool merchant's daughter with minor nobility, using a combination of creative accounting, strategic lighting during the viewing sessions, and claims about distant relations to Byzantine royalty that definitely won't hold up under scrutiny. "All marriage is compromise," she mutters, doctoring the girl's portrait to remove a prominent wart. The most depressing aspect is watching the difficult cases. Older women, meaning over 23. Younger sons with no inheritance. Anyone with visible disabilities. Or merchants who've lost their fortunes but not their pride. Signora Zorzi keeps these files in a separate section she privately calls the miracle drawer, because it would take divine intervention to marry them off. Yet she persists, lowering standards incrementally like a reverse auction where everyone loses but at least gets to share their misery with someone else who couldn't do better. The crinkle of parchment fills the afternoon air as you intercept what appears to be a love letter, making its circuitous journey through Venice's most public postal system. The page, perfumed with enough rosewater to suffocate a small dog, has already passed through at least 6 hands before reaching you, and is not even addressed to you. This is how correspondence works in Venice. Every passionate declaration, every tearful plea, every terrible attempt at poetry becomes community property faster than you can say privacy violation. You learn that sending a truly private letter in Renaissance Venice requires either extraordinary wealth or criminal connections, preferably both. The mainstream historical record shows that literate Venetians often employed 3 different letter writers, one for the actual message, one for the address in different handwriting, and a third to create a false decoy letter designed to be artiniss or to be intercepted. It's like encryption, except the key is gossip, and everyone's trying to crack your code for entertainment. The journey of a typical love letter reads like a comedy of errors written by someone with a sadistic sense of humor. First, you hire a professional scribe because your own handwriting might be recognized, and also because most nobles can barely spell their own names. The scribe, naturally, keeps copies of all the juicy bits for his own collection, which he shares at the tavern. Next, you need a messenger, usually some kid who can't read, but has memorized every affair in the city through sheer osmosis. This messenger will definitely take the scenic route, stopping at his aunt's house where the letter gets steamed open over her cooking pot. Here's the bizarre historical nugget that makes researchers cackle. Some Venetian families employed letter testers, servants whose job was to intercept and read their own family's outgoing mail before it left the house. These literary spies would check for inappropriate sentiments, excessive passion, or worse, poor grammar that might embarrass the family name. Imagine having your love letter proofread by your mother's most judgmental servant, who suggests your metaphor comparing your beloved to a radiant star is cliché, and recommends luminous pearl instead. The public reading of love letters becomes Venice's favorite spectator sport. You witness a crowd gathering in Campo Santa Maria Formosa, where someone's intercepted correspondence is being performed by local actors. Yes, actual actors who make their living dramatically interpreting private messages. The letter in question contains such gems as, "Your eyes are like olives, green and briny," which sends the audience into hysterics. The poor suitor, recognizable despite his attempt to hide behind a pillar, looks ready to throw himself into the nearest canal. Professional letter writers set up shop near major churches, advertising their services with samples of their most purple prose. Compositions for every occasion, one sign promises, from first attraction to bitter rejection. You watch customers whisper their requirements while nervously glancing around for eavesdroppers who are definitely there, probably taking notes. The scribes offer various packages, basic declarations, premium passion with classical references, and the deluxe option featuring personalized acrostic poems that spell out your beloved's name if you read the first letter of each line. The fact that these often spell things like Maria, as magnificent ardor radiates in angels, makes you understand why so many Venetian marriages involve heavy drinking. Historians still argue whether the public nature of correspondence helped or hindered romance in Venice. What's undeniable is that it created a thriving secondary market in blackmail, counter letters, and what we'd now call damage control. Rich families employ teams of writers to flood the city with false love letters designed to confuse gossips and provide cover for real affairs. You overhear one matron instructing her scribe, "Write 17 letters from my daughter to different suitors. Make 3 passionate, 5 lukewarm, and the rest politely discouraging." That should keep the neighbors guessing. The most pathetic scenes involve love letters that go viral, in the Renaissance sense. One particularly awful poem, comparing a woman's complexion to the finest cheese, aged in darkness, gets copied and recopied until every literate person in Venice can recite it from memory. The original author tries desperately to claim it's been miscopied, that he actually wrote C's, not cheese, but the damage is done. His beloved marries someone else, specifically citing the cheese incident in her rejection letter, which naturally also becomes public entertainment. You realize that in Venice, bad poetry doesn't just hurt your romantic chances, it achieves immortality through public mockery. The heavy oak doors of San Zaccaria Church creak open as you slip inside, immediately sensing you've entered the nerve center of Venice's romantic surveillance state, Father Antonio. A priest who looks like he subsists entirely on communion wine and gossip, watches from his elevated pulpit with the intensity of a hawk who spotted a particularly juicy mouse. The church doesn't just oversee your spiritual life here. It manages, documents, and judges every romantic impulse from first crush to final breath, with a bureaucratic efficiency that would make modern surveillance states jealous. You discover that every parish priest maintains what they call the Book of Intentions, though locals know it as the Who's Courting Whom Chronicle. These leather-bound tomes contain detailed records of every flirtation, courtship, and marital negotiation in the neighborhood, updated weekly through a network of confessions, concerned parishioners, and strategic positioning during Mass. The mainstream historical fact that amazes modern readers is that these books were legal documents. A priest's notation could make or break marriage contracts, inheritance claims, and social standing. The confessional becomes Venice's most dangerous dating app. Young people quickly learn that admitting attraction during confession means that information enters the priest's mental database, to be cross-referenced with other confessions and deployed at strategically devastating moments. You overhear Father Antonio accidentally mentioning during his sermon about the dangers of lust, while staring directly at young Marco Benedetti, who confessed impure thoughts about the baker's daughter last Tuesday. The baker's daughter, naturally, blushes crimson. Her mother starts calculating dowry requirements, and Marco considers converting to Protestantism. Here's the deliciously weird historical detail. Some Venetian churches employed romance notaries, clerics whose sole job was documenting romantic activities in the parish. These obsessive record keepers noted who sat near whom during Mass, whose family made offerings on which saint's day, San Valentino being particularly telling, and who lingered suspiciously long at the holy water font when certain young ladies were present. They created spreadsheets before spreadsheets existed, tracking romantic patterns with the dedication of modern data analysts, minus the computers. The pre-marriage investigations conducted by the Church make modern background checks look lackadaisical. Once a couple announces their intention to marry, the priest launches an inquisition that involves interviewing neighbors, servants, former wet nurses, and anyone who might have dirt to share. You witness one such investigation, where Father Antonio grills a gondolier about whether he ever transported the bride-to-be unchaperoned. The gondolier sweats through his shirt, clearly torn between truth, loyalty, and the very real possibility of excommunication for perjury. Historians still debate whether these investigations prevented more scandals than they created, but everyone agrees they provided excellent entertainment for parishioners. The Church's dating surveillance extends beyond documentation to active intervention. Priests regularly break up couples deemed unsuitable, which could mean anything from social mismatch to insufficient donations to the church building fund. You watch Father Antonio orchestrate a complex maneuver involving strategic seating rearrangements during Mass, convenient scheduling of confession times, and mysterious delays in publishing marriage bans. Within weeks, the inappropriate match dissolves, and miraculously, a more suitable and wealthier suitor appears. The Lord works in mysterious ways, especially when those ways involve increasing church revenues. Sunday Mass transforms into a carefully choreographed dating showcase where every gesture carries meaning. The order of receiving communion, the length of prayer time, even the coins dropped in the collection plate, all become signals in an elaborate courtship dance, performed under the watchful eyes of saints, priests, and that terrifying widow who sits in the front pew taking mental notes. Young women develop neck problems from trying to look devout, while simultaneously checking if their intended is watching them look devout. Meanwhile, young men perfect the art of religious ecstasy that conveniently involves gazing toward the women's section of the church. The most mortifying aspect of church surveillance is the public reading of marriage bans, where proposed unions are announced 3 weeks in a row, giving anyone with objections time to speak up. And speak up they do. You witness one poor couple's bans interrupted by an ex-lover claiming a prior engagement, a neighbor insisting the groom owes him money, and the bride's own cousin suggesting she check for a peculiar birthmark in an unfortunate location before committing. The priest notes everything in his book. The congregation takes mental notes for future gossip, and the couple contemplates eloping to some place with less aggressive Christianity, like Rome. The afternoon passeggiata along the Riva degli Schiavoni transforms into Venice's most elegant meat market, where marriageable youth parade like prize cattle with better jewelry. You position yourself near the Doge's palace, the perfect vantage point to observe this daily ritual where families display their genetic assets with the strategic precision of military campaigns. The marble promenade stretches before you, a runway where every step is calculated, every glance measured, and every accidental encounter has been rehearsed since breakfast. You quickly grasp the choreography of this maritime marriage mart. Between the 4th and 6th bells, precisely when the light flatters even the most unfortunate complexions, noble families emerge in formation. Mothers lead like warships. Daughters follow in careful array, and unmarried sons trail behind pretending they're here for the sea air. The mainstream historical record confirms that some families hired walking instructors to teach their children the optimal stride length for displaying wealth without appearing rushed. Too fast suggests desperation. Too slow implies arrogance or, worse, physical defects. The positioning along the promenade follows rules stricter than naval navigation. Prime real estate sits between the Bridge of Sighs and the Church of San Giorgio, where foot traffic peaks, and the architectural backdrop suggests both prosperity and piety. Lesser families get relegated to the fish market end, where the aroma of yesterday's catch mingles with their matrimonial hopes. You notice how families time their walks to accidentally intersect with desired matches, creating collisions that require profuse apologies and, conveniently, introductions. Here's the absurd historical detail that makes even serious scholars giggle. Wealthy families employed promenade scouts, servants who walked the route an hour early, mapping the positions of potential suitors and rivals like some sort of romantic reconnaissance mission. These scouts use coded signals. A red handkerchief meant, the Grimaldi boy is out with his attractive cousin, while adjusting their cap meant, abort mission. His mother brought the marriage contract lawyer. The intelligence gathered shaped the afternoon strategy, determining everything from which daughter wore the best dress to whether they walked clockwise or counterclockwise. The clothing choices for these parades require more strategic planning than most military campaigns. You observe young women wearing fortunes worth of silk and pearls, their dresses carefully chosen to suggest wealth while maintaining modesty. A neckline too high screams, convent bound. Too low shouts, questionable morals. The men peacock in their own way, sporting capes that accidentally reveal silk linings, jeweled daggers that catch the light just so, and codpieces that, well, let's just say some gentlemen are more optimistic about their advertising than others. One particularly ambitious youth sports a codpiece so elaborate it requires its own structural support, causing nearby matrons to fan themselves with varying degrees of genuine and performed shock. The communication system during these walks relies entirely on props and gesture. Fans flutter in coded sequences, gloves drop at crucial moments, and prayer books open to specific psalms that definitely aren't being read for their spiritual content. You watch one couple conduct an entire conversation through parasol angles while their chaperones pretend not to notice. She tilts left for yes, right for no, and a full spin apparently means, "My father has increased my dowry." Historians still argue whether these codes were standardized or if every family invented their own, leading to tragic misunderstandings where a sneeze was interpreted as a marriage proposal. The spectator sport aspect of promenade courtship cannot be overstated. Venetians who can't afford to participate in the marriage market still show up to watch, critique, and place informal bets on which matches will succeed. Elderly widows claim the best viewing benches hours early, armed with wine, wisdom, and withering commentary. "See that Morosini girl?" one cackles to her companion. "Third season on the market. They've lowered their standards from Duke to has most of his teeth." Their running commentary provides better entertainment than any commedia dell'arte performance. The absolute peak of promenade desperation occurs during the final weeks before Lent, when unmarried youth who failed to secure matches face another year of walking. The parade takes on a frantic quality. Smiles grow fixed, waves become aggressive, and some families resort to hiring attractive cousins from the mainland to walk alongside their less fortunate offspring, hoping proximity to beauty might prove contagious. You witness one mother literally shoving her daughter into the path of an eligible bachelor, causing a collision that sends them both into the lagoon. The young man gallantly rescues her. They're now soaking wet, but technically introduced, and the mother considers it a victory worth the ruined silk. The scratching of quills on parchment fills the Palazzo Grimani's great hall as you witness the most brutally public negotiation this side of a livestock auction, except the commodity being haggled over is someone's daughter, and the auctioneer is her own father. The dowry negotiation, that cornerstone of Venetian marriage where love takes a distant backseat to accounting, unfolds before you like a particularly mean-spirited theatre production where everyone knows their lines but pretends to be improvising. The poor bride-to-be sits in the corner embroidering furiously, pretending she can't hear her worth being calculated in ducats, property, and government bonds. You realize these negotiations aren't just family affairs. They're public spectacles that draw crowds like bear baiting, but with lawyers. The mainstream historical fact that modern readers find appalling is that Venice actually required dowry contracts to be registered publicly at the Cancelleria, where anyone could review them. This transparency meant everyone knew exactly what your daughter was worth, creating a literal marketplace where families could comparison shop. The Benedetti girl went for 3,000 ducats plus 2 shops on the Rialto. You hear one mother whispering, "We should hold out for at least 3,500. The negotiating teams resemble corporate merger committees. If corporations wore doublets and solved disagreements with honor duels, each side brings lawyers, notaries, appraisers, and that one uncle who claims he once studied law in Padua, but mostly just drinks the wine. The groom's family arrives with documentation proving their son's earning potential, family connections, and a suspiciously glowing letter of recommendation from a bishop who definitely received a generous donation. The bride's family counters with property deeds, jewelry assessments, and creative accounting that would make modern tax evaders weep with admiration, Here's the grotesque historical detail that makes even hardened researchers cringe. Some families hired dowry inflation specialists who used theatrical tricks to make their assets appear more valuable. They'd parade servants carrying empty chests painted to look heavy with gold, display paste jewels in candlelight where the forgeries were less obvious, and present livestock that was secretly rented for the day. One notorious case involved a family who listed 40 head of cattle in their dowry offer, failing to mention they were miniature decorative cows worth less than a decent meal. The public nature of these negotiations means everyone gets to witness family's most humiliating moments. You watch as the Morosini patriarch desperately tries to convince the groom's family that his daughter's accomplishments justify a lower cash dowry. She speaks 3 languages, he pleads. 4, if you count Latin. The groom's mother sniffs disdainfully. Languages don't compound interest. The daughter in question maintains her frozen smile while probably conjugating Latin verbs for patricide in her head. The haggling techniques employed would shame a Turkish bazaar. Fathers weep dramatically about poverty while wearing rings worth more than gondoliers earn in a lifetime. Mothers faint strategically when the negotiations stall, requiring expensive physicians who happen to mention the family's excellent health history. You witness one negotiation where both families bring their own musicians, trying to create competing emotional atmospheres. The bride's family opts for tragic lutes, while the groom's family counters with triumphant trumpets. The cacophony drives 3 notaries to drink before noon. Historians still debate whether the public dowry system protected women by ensuring transparency or humiliated them by reducing their worth to numbers. What's undeniable is that it created a spectator sport where Venice's gossips could calculate everyone's exact social standing. The negotiations spawned secondary markets, betting pools on final amounts, insurance schemes against dowry default, and even dowry loans at interest rates that would make loan sharks blush. The church officially condemns usury while quietly investing in these same financial instruments. The climax comes with the actual contract signing, performed before an audience that includes extended family, business associates, and anyone who could squeeze into the palazzo. The documents get read aloud in excruciating detail, including clauses about what happens if the bride dies in childbirth. Dowry reverts to her family. If the groom dies at sea, she keeps the interest but not the principal. Or if either party proves infertile, lawyers argue for 3 hours about the definition of adequate attempts. The bride and groom exchange glances across the room, perhaps wondering if love might have been simpler, while their families toast a successful merger with wine that costs more than most dowries. The cacophony of vials, lutes, and what sounds suspiciously like a dying cat fills the narrow canal as you witness Venice's most romantically catastrophic tradition, the hired serenade. It's 3 a.m. Every shuttered window on the street has flung open to reveal furious faces, and the lead musician, clearly drunk on both wine and his own perceived talent, continues warbling about his patron's beloved having breasts like ripe melons, heavy with summer's promise. The object of this agricultural affection stands on her balcony, looking like she's contemplating whether jumping into the canal would be less embarrassing than being associated with this performance. You learn that hiring musicians to serenade your intended follows protocols more complex than international trade agreements. The mainstream historical record shows that Venice actually licensed official serenading companies who maintain territories stricter than crime families. Perform in the wrong neighborhood without permission, and you might find your lute floating in the lagoon, with you still attached to it. These musical matchmakers charge by the hour, by the instrument. and by the perceived difficulty of the woman being wooed. She's a widow with property, one musician explains, adjusting his rates upward. That requires at least 3 violins and a theorbo. The timing of serenades becomes crucial strategic intelligence. Too early in the evening suggests desperation. Too late implies you've been drinking at taverns and she's an afterthought. The sweet spot hits between the second and third night bells, when the city's quiet enough for music to carry, but not so late that fathers emerge with crossbows. You watch one young man pace nervously, checking the church bells every few minutes, while his hired musicians tune their instruments with the focus of surgeons preparing for amputation. Here's the absurd historical tidbit that makes even tone-deaf historians laugh. Wealthy suitors sometimes hired anti-serenaders, musicians who would perform deliberately terrible music under rivals' names. Picture Romeo hiring a tone-deaf quartet to screech Mercutio's love songs under Juliet's window, ensuring she'd never take his friends seriously again. These musical saboteurs developed specialties: off-key madrigals, rhythmically challenged pavans, and lyrics that started romantically, but somehow always ended up rhyming amore with syphilis sore. The content of serenade songs ranges from genuinely touching to accidentally hilarious to purposefully obscene. You witness one performance where the singer, having forgotten the prescribed lyrics, improvises verses comparing his beloved to various foods: your skin like fresh mozzarella, your eyes like coffee beans, your lips like wine-soaked cherries, your, personality like a really nice minestrone. The musicians behind him soldier on professionally, while the audience, because there's always an audience, howls with laughter. The poor suitor stands in the shadows, visibly calculating whether drowning himself now would be faster than social death by soup metaphor. Professional serenaders develop reputations that can make or break a courtship. The legendary Antonio Golden Throat. Bavaro charges fees that could fund a small war, but guarantees results. Rumor says 3 notes from his lute have caused swooning, proposals, and in one memorable case, a nun to renounce her vows. On the opposite end, Sergio the Screecher offers budget serenades that technically fulfill the tradition, while ensuring your beloved appreciates any future silence. Historians still argue whether hiring terrible musicians represents advanced reverse psychology or just poor judgment. The public response to serenades creates its own entertainment ecosystem. Neighbors develop rating systems, shouting scores from their windows like Olympic judges. 2 out of 10, I've heard better music from grinding millstones, becomes a common refrain. Some entrepreneurial residents sell cushions designed for throwing at bad musicians, soft enough to avoid murder charges, heavy enough to make a point. You observe one serenade devolve into a full-pitch battle between the musicians and the neighborhood, with rotten vegetables, chamber pots, and increasingly creative profanity flying through the air. The most pathetic scenes involve serenades gone catastrophically wrong. Musicians who show up at the wrong address and refuse to leave. We're paid for 2 hours. We play for 2 hours. Singers who forget which woman they're supposed to be praising and use the wrong name throughout. And that memorable incident where a lutist fell into the canal mid-performance but continued playing while treading water, determined to earn his fee. The woman being serenaded often faces the horrible choice between acknowledging the disaster, thus admitting association, or pretending she can't hear it while everyone knows she can. You see one resourceful lady solve this by having her servant announce loudly that she's suddenly gone deaf, a medical miracle that lasts exactly as long as the serenade. The notary's chamber in the Procuratia Vecchi buzzes with more excitement than a public execution. Which makes sense, because what's happening here, the signing of a marriage contract, carries similar life or death stakes for everyone involved. You squeeze between merchant wives and curious clerks to witness this peculiar Venetian tradition where legal documents become performance art and romance gets buried under an avalanche of sub-clauses. The bride and groom sit at opposite ends of a long table, close enough to share meaningful glances, but far enough apart to prevent any unseemly touching that might scandal the approximately 70 witnesses crammed into a room built for 20. The notary himself, a skeletal man who seems to sustain himself entirely on legal fees and others' misery, begins reading the contract in a voice that could drone bees to sleep. Every clause gets pronounced with theatrical precision, partly for legal clarity, but mostly because everyone's paying attention and he's charging by the hour. The mainstream historical fact that amazes modern scholars is that these contracts often exceeded 50 pages, detailing everything from dowry payment schedules to which spouse gets the good bed linens in case of annulment. Romans had bread and circuses. Venetians have marriage contracts and Prosecco. You realize these signings aren't just legal formalities. They're the season finale of a romantic drama everyone's been following for months. The audience includes business partners evaluating the family's financial commitment, rivals calculating whether this alliance threatens their interests, and that subset of Venetians who simply enjoy watching other people make potentially catastrophic life decisions. One elderly woman near you provides running commentary. Look at the groom's handshaking, either nerves or he's realized what her mother's really like. Here's the bizarre historical detail that makes contract lawyers weep with envy. Some families hired clause performers, actors who would dramatically act out specific contract provisions to ensure everyone understood them. You watch in disbelief as a mime demonstrates what constitutes conjugal abandonment, while the actual couple tries to maintain dignity. Another performer illustrates the penalties for adultery through an interpretive dance that leaves several matrons fanning themselves and calling for wine. It's legal theatre at its finest, or worst, depending on your perspective. The negotiation continues even during the signing ceremony. Lawyers huddle in corners, whispering about last-minute amendments while the couple sits frozen like particularly well-dressed statues. "We need to specify which gondola she keeps if he dies at sea," one lawyer hisses. "The blue one or the one with gold trim?" These 11th hour additions create dramatic tension. Will the fathers agree? Will the mothers faint? Will anyone remember what they're actually signing? The notary adds codicils with the speed of a carnival dealer, each addition requiring new witnesses and more fees. The actual moment of signing transforms into choreographed chaos. The groom must sign first, tradition, but not too eagerly, suspicious, with a quill that's been blessed by a priest, insurance, using ink mixed with holy water, more insurance, while standing on his left foot. Nobody remembers why. The bride follows, her signature carefully practiced to show education, but not too much independence. Witnesses line up like communicants, each adding their mark while whispering assessments of the match. "It'll last 6 months," one merchant mutters while signing. She's already eyeing his younger brother. Historians still debate whether public contract signings strengthened marriages by creating social pressure or doomed them by starting unions with public humiliation. What's certain is that they generated enough gossip to fuel Venice's rumor mills for weeks. Failed signings, where someone refuses at the last moment or faints too convincingly to continue, become legendary. You hear about one groom who signed his name, then ate the contract rather than let his bride sign, claiming divine inspiration. The resulting lawsuit lasted longer than most marriages, The post-signing celebration feels less like a party and more like a successful business merger, which essentially it is. Toasts reference profit margins more than love, and the couple receives gifts clearly chosen for their resale value. The bride's smile remains fixed as her new mother-in-law loudly calculates how many grandchildren are needed to justify the dowry investment. Meanwhile, the groom discovers that marrying into a wealthy family means acquiring not just a wife, but an entire board of directors with opinions about everything from his career choices to his digestive health. The evening ends with everyone slightly drunk, legally bound, and already planning the next generation's contracts. The knock on your door at dawn comes with the authoritative weight of people who believe managing your love life falls under civic duty. You open it to find 3 stern-faced members of your neighborhood's Committee for Matrimonial Propriety, a baker's wife built like a fortress, a retired notary who documents everything in triplicate, and someone's grandmother who seems to know every sexual indiscretion committed in Venice since 1423. These self-appointed guardians of romance operate with quasi-legal authority that would make modern HOAs look like anarchist collectives. And they're here because someone saw you talking to the fishmonger's daughter for 4 minutes longer than deemed appropriate. You discover that each Venetian neighborhood maintains these informal but terrifyingly effective committees, staffed by citizens with too much time and too little personal drama. The mainstream historical record confirms that while these groups had no official legal standing, they wielded power through the most effective weapon in Venice's arsenal: organized gossip. Cross them, and suddenly every merchant knows about your gambling debts, every matchmaker questions your virility, and every priest develops concerns about your spiritual fitness for marriage. The committee's methods combine surveillance techniques that would impress modern intelligence agencies with the moral flexibility of career politicians. They maintain detailed logs of who visits whom, at what hours, for how long, and wearing which clothes. Tuesday, 3rd bell. Marco Benedetti arrives at Zanetti House wearing his best doublet, stays 47 minutes, emerges with hair slightly disheveled. Servant reports only light refreshments served. Suspicious. The retired notary reads from his ledger with the satisfaction of someone who's found meaning in making others miserable. Here's the deliciously weird historical fact. Some neighborhoods actually elected official love prefects, usually widows with vendettas against happiness, who coordinated romantic surveillance across parish boundaries. These bitter cupids developed exchange programs, sharing intelligence about cross-neighborhood courtships like trading cards. I'll give you full details on the Morosini boys' Tuesday visits if you tell me who's been serenading the baker's daughter. They created vast networks of romantic espionage that makes Facebook stalking look quaint. The committee's intervention in your romantic life follows predictable patterns. First comes the friendly warning, a visit where they explain, while eating your food and criticizing your housekeeping, that your behavior has been noticed, then escalates to public shaming, usually involving strategically placed announcements during market day. Finally, they deploy the nuclear option, informing both sets of parents, the parish priest, and that gossipy fruit vendor who ensures everyone knows your business before you do. You witness one poor couple trying to conduct a courtship under committee scrutiny. Every meeting requires written notification 3 days in advance, with stated purpose, proposed chaperones, and planned activities. Deviations result in immediate documentation. The couple develops increasingly creative workarounds. Chance encounters at the fish market, committee notes, 17th accidental meeting this month, simultaneous attendance at different relatives' houses that happened to share a garden wall, and my personal favorite, communicating through trained pigeons that the committee spends weeks trying to intercept. Historians still argue whether these neighborhood committees served any useful purpose beyond providing entertainment for bored citizens. They certainly complicated many romances, but they also occasionally prevented disasters. You hear about one committee that uncovered a bigamist through their obsessive record-keeping, and another that noticed a young woman's suitor was actually 3 different men sharing the same clothes and identity. "We saved her from a life of confusion," the baker's wife says proudly. "Imagine the laundry." The most pathetic aspect of committee oversight is watching them try to manage their own family's romances while maintaining apparent objectivity. The baker's wife, who terrorizes young couples, suddenly becomes flexible when her own son courts inappropriately. The notary who documents every glance discovers his daughter's secret romance only after she's eloped to Padua. The grandmother who knows everyone's business somehow missed her own granddaughter conducting an affair with a married gondolier in her own house. The hypocrisy is staggering, the blindness selective, and the entertainment value immeasurable. The committee leaves your house with warnings about appropriate courtship behavior and a promise to keep an eye on things. You realize that in Venice, privacy isn't just dead, it's been murdered, dismembered, and its parts distributed among your neighbors for safekeeping. Every romantic gesture must be calculated not just for its effect on your beloved, but for how it will play before the neighborhood tribunal. It's exhausting, it's invasive, and it's exactly why so many Venetians develop drinking problems or sudden vocations requiring immediate relocation to the colonies. The drums begin at dawn, a slow, mournful beat that makes your stomach drop because you know what's coming. Someone's about to take the walk of shame through Venice's streets, and the entire city has cleared their calendars to watch. You follow the growing crowd toward Campo San Polo, where a makeshift platform awaits today's victim, a young woman caught in a compromising position with her music teacher, discovered by the kind of neighbor who considers destroying lives a civic duty. She stands there in a rough shift, her hair shorn, while a herald reads out her crimes against proper courtship in excruciating detail. The Venetian system of public punishment for romantic transgressions makes modern social media shaming look positively genteel. The mainstream historical fact that horrifies contemporary readers is that these weren't random mob actions, but carefully orchestrated state ceremonies, complete with official protocols, designated routes, and a sliding scale of humiliation based on the severity of the offense. Kissing without permission? That's 1 hour in the pillory. Found in a compromising position? Expect a full day's parade through the city's busiest markets. You watch as the procession forms with all the pageantry of a religious festival, except instead of celebrating saints, they're destroying sinners. Musicians lead the way, not the romantic serenaders, but drummers and horn players creating a cacophony designed to attract maximum attention. Behind them walks the offender, sometimes alone, sometimes with their paramour if both were caught. The crowd follows, a moving mass of righteousness and barely concealed glee, because nothing brings Venetians together like someone else's public humiliation. Here's the grotesque detail that makes even jaded historians wince. Wealthy families could pay for shame substitutes, usually desperate poor women who would walk in place of the actual offender. The real transgressor watched from a balcony while some unfortunate soul who needed the money more than dignity took their punishment. Everyone knew about the substitution, which somehow made it worse. The crowd would shout things like, "How much did they pay you to pretend to be a whore?" while the actual offender sipped wine above. Their reputation technically intact, but everyone knowing exactly what they'd done. The creativity of these punishments reveals a culture that elevated humiliation to an art form. You witness one young man forced to wear a sign reading, "I promise marriage to 3 women," while actual representatives of said women follow him throwing symbolic items, dead flowers, torn letters, and in one memorable case, a live chicken that seems as confused as everyone else about its role in this drama. Another couple, caught using forged documents to marry, must walk backward through the city, symbolizing their reverse journey from legitimacy to shame. The routes these processions take are carefully chosen for maximum exposure, through the Rialto market at peak hours, past the Doge's palace during the changing of the guard, around San Marco during Sunday mass dismissal, every stop calculated to ensure the maximum number of witnesses. Merchants pause their haggling to hurl insults. Nobles lean from windows to get better views. And children follow along learning exactly what happens when you violate Venice's romantic rules. One woman near you lifts her daughter onto her shoulders, saying, "Remember this when that Grimaldi boy comes calling." Historians still debate whether these public shamings actually deterred romantic misbehavior or just drove it deeper underground. What's undeniable is their entertainment value, Venice's equivalent of must-see TV. People plan their shopping around scheduled shame walks. Vendors set up stalls along the route selling refreshments. And artists sketch the proceedings for later sale to those who missed the live performance. You overhear one entrepreneur discussing plans to publish a weekly broadsheet rating. The best shame walks. Tuesday's adulteress was properly remorseful, but Thursday's bigamist showed real star quality. The aftermath of these public punishments often proves worse than the event itself. The shamed individuals become social ghosts, invisible to former friends, unemployable in respectable trades, and definitely unmarriageable through conventional channels. Some flee Venice entirely, starting new lives in cities that don't require public humiliation as entertainment. Others retreat into convents or monasteries, choosing divine marriage over earthly shame. The truly desperate turn to Venice's shadow economy, prostitution, smuggling, or worse, professions where a ruined reputation might actually be an asset. You see one former shame walker now running a tavern called the Scarlet Swan, catering specifically to others who've survived the walks. It's either inspiring or depressing, possibly both. The German merchant staggers backward as a fish lands squarely on his embroidered doublet, thrown by a helpful Venetian matron who shrieks, "That's not how we court here, you barbarian." You're witnessing the daily comedy of foreign suitors attempting to navigate Venice's labyrinthine romantic customs, a spectacle that provides more entertainment than any commedia dell'arte troupe. The poor Bavarian's crime? He attempted to speak directly to a young woman without first negotiating with her father, her uncle, her priest, 2 matchmakers, and apparently this fish-wielding guardian of propriety. You quickly realize that Venice's dating rules aren't just complex. They're actively hostile to outsiders who arrive thinking their homeland's customs will translate. The mainstream historical record shows that foreign merchants often hired cultural romantic interpreters, locals who specialized in preventing international incidents disguised as marriage proposals. These interpreters charge exorbitant fees to explain why a French nobleman can't just declare his love publicly, too direct, why an English merchant can't send expensive gifts before formal negotiations, presumptuous, or why that Turkish trader absolutely cannot mention his other wives during dowry discussions, The adaptation attempts by foreign suitors range from endearing to catastrophic. You watch a Spanish grandee trying to organize a proper Venetian serenade, but his homeland's passionate guitar work translates poorly to Venetian sensibilities. It sounds like he's declaring war, not love. One observer notes, as the Spaniards' musicians create volume levels that wake babies 3 canals away. Meanwhile, a Dutch merchant attempts the local custom of dropping a handkerchief near his beloved, but his practical Northern European soul can't bear to dirty good linen, so he drops a carefully folded napkin that he immediately retrieves, defeating the entire purpose. Here's the absurd historical tidbit that makes xenophobic tendencies seem almost quaint. Venice maintained semi-official foreign suitor guides written in various languages, though the translations were so bad they caused more problems than they solved. The German version famously translated gentle courtship as aggressive pursuit, leading to a generation of Teutonic suitors who thought stalking was culturally appropriate. The English guide suggested that offering your arm meant literally detaching and presenting it, which explains why English suitors were known for wildly inappropriate sleeve-grabbing incidents. The culture shocks multiply exponentially when foreign customs clash with Venetian expectations. A Hungarian nobleman, accustomed to proving his worth through feats of strength, challenges his beloved's father to a wrestling match in the Piazza San Marco. The father, a sedentary banker who hasn't lifted anything heavier than a purse in decades, responds by having the Hungarian arrested for assault. An Ottoman merchant brings what he considers an appropriate courting gift, 3 camels, which his intended's family interprets as an insult, sparking a diplomatic incident that requires intervention from the Council of 10. You observe the particularly painful experience of a young Frenchman trying to apply Parisian salon culture to Venetian courtship. He organizes an elaborate literary evening, complete with poetry readings and philosophical debates, expecting to impress his chosen lady with his wit. The Venetian audience sits in bewildered silence as he declaims about the metaphysics of love, while his intended yawns behind her fan and her mother mentally calculates how much this embarrassment has reduced his marriageability. "Is he having a breakdown?" someone whispers. "Should we call a priest?" Historians still argue whether Venice's hostility to foreign courtship methods reflected protective xenophobia or just garden-variety provincial snobbery. What's clear is that successful foreign suitors either completely abandoned their homeland customs or found Venetian women willing to risk social exile for exotic romance. The rare success stories usually involved massive wealth that could smooth over cultural differences. Gold speaks a universal language, even in Venice. The most tragic cases involve foreign suitors who actually succeed in winning their beloved's heart, but fail to navigate the bureaucratic maze. You hear about a Scottish merchant who spent 3 years courting properly, only to discover his marriage contract was invalid because he signed with his clan name rather than his baptismal name. A Polish noble successfully negotiates a dowry, impresses the family, even gains the priest's blessing, then ruins everything by kissing his bride at the betrothal ceremony, a shocking breach of protocol that leads to the engagement's immediate termination. He leaves Venice muttering about Mediterranean madness, while she's promptly engaged to a local boy who knows to keep his lips to himself until the wedding night. The evening light catches on the canal waters as you witness something extraordinary, a young couple laughing together on a bridge, unchaperoned, clearly in love, and somehow not being pelted with vegetables by outraged neighbors. This is the miracle of Venice. For all its suffocating rules, public scrutiny, and institutionalized romantic surveillance, genuine affection occasionally breaks through like sunlight-piercing storm clouds. You're seeing one of those rare moments when love conquers spectacle, though the cynic in you notes that 3 matchmakers are definitely taking notes from a nearby doorway. You discover that Venice's most enduring love stories often began as its most scandalous rebellions. The mainstream historical fact that contemporary records try to downplay is that about 1 in 5 marriages resulted from couples who simply refused to follow the rules, eloping to the mainland, forging documents, or finding sympathetic priests who valued sacrament over social protocol. These romantic rebels paid steep prices, facing family exile, inheritance loss, and social ostracism. Yet somehow, their marriages showed lower annulment rates than properly negotiated unions. The ways couples subvert the system reveal both impressive creativity and desperate determination. You learn about the notorious Garden of San Francesco, a monastery garden where sympathetic friars allowed secret meetings in exchange for generous donations to the poor box. Lovers develop elaborate codes using church bells, laundry hanging patterns, and even trained cats carrying messages. One couple maintains a 2-year correspondence by hiding letters inside prayer books at San Marco, their entire courtship conducted in margins meant for devotional notes. Meet Me at Vespers takes on entirely different meanings when scrawled next to psalms about divine love. Here's the beautifully weird historical detail that makes even cynics smile. Some neighborhood committees, those bastions of propriety, occasionally conspired to help true love overcome bureaucratic obstacles. When a committee grandmother notices genuine affection between unsuitable matches, she might accidentally lose damaging documentation or develop convenient blind spots during crucial surveillance periods. These romantic double agents operate carefully, maintaining harsh public facades while secretly engineering chance encounters and providential delays in rival suitors' negotiations. It's corruption in the service of love, Venice's most forgivable crime, the public nature of Venetian romance, designed to control and commodify, sometimes backfires spectacularly in love's favor. You witness one such reversal during a shame walk, where a young woman punished for refusing an arranged marriage walks with such dignity that the crowd's jeers turn to murmurs of admiration. By the time she reaches San Marco, people are throwing flowers instead of insults. Her chosen lover steps from the crowd, takes her hand, and together they walk to a waiting boat. The authorities could stop them, but don't. Even Venetian bureaucracy occasionally bows to a good love story. These triumphant moments often require allies in unexpected places. Gondoliers, those gossip mongers who usually fuel the surveillance state, sometimes become love's secret agents, creating accidents that strand couples together or developing sudden hearing problems during crucial conversations. Servants risk their positions to carry messages. Elderly aunts discover rebellious streaks, and even stern fathers occasionally remember their own thwarted romances. The network that usually enforces conformity can, when touched by genuine emotion, pivot to enable escape. Historians still debate why some love stories penetrated Venice's cynical heart, while others crashed against its regulations. Perhaps it's the city's theatrical nature. Venice loves a good drama, and true love provides better entertainment than arranged marriages. Or maybe it's simpler. In a city built on water, everyone understands that fighting the tide only works for so long. Eventually, you must flow with it or drown. The couple on the bridge parts ways as the bells ring for evening prayers. but their smiles suggest this isn't an ending. Tomorrow, they'll return to the theatre of public courtship, the surveillance, the negotiations. Yet something has shifted. You can see it in how the watching matchmakers nod approvingly rather than calculating market values. Sometimes, rarely, miraculously, love writes its own rules in this floating city of regulations. When it does, even Venice's hardest hearts remember why they built all these elaborate systems in the first place. Because love, real love, is powerful enough to require an entire city's worth of barriers to contain it. And sometimes, gloriously, it breaks free anyway. As you watch the last golden light fade from the canal, you realize that Venice's spectacular dating culture, for all its absurdity, cruelty, and public theatre, serves as civilization's most elaborate admission that love remains essentially ungovernable. Every rule, every committee, every shameful punishment exists because someone, somewhere, loved wildly enough to require containment. In trying to make romance predictable, Venice accidentally created a city where breaking the rules for love becomes the greatest romance of all. The evening settles over Venice like a silk curtain falling on the final act of an elaborate play. You find yourself back where you started, on that narrow bridge. But now the city's romantic machinery seems less like a prison and more like an elaborate piece of clockwork. Intricate, sometimes cruel, but ultimately as human as the hearts it tried to regulate. The canals below reflect the last amber traces of sunset. And somewhere in the distance, a gondolier hums a love song, probably calculating his tip. You've witnessed the spectacular theatre of Venetian courtship, the balcony advertisements, the gondola choreography, the carnival masquerades where hearts hid behind painted faces. You've seen love reduced to ledger entries and dowry negotiations, watched shame walks that entertained while they destroyed, observed foreign suitors stumble through cultural minefields armed only with good intentions and terrible guidebooks. Through it all, the city floated on, imperious to the human dramas playing out on its stages. But here's what the official histories won't tell you, what the matchmakers never quite understood, what even the all-seeing neighborhood committees missed. Every rule Venice created to contain love only proved love's persistence. Each regulation became a challenge, every barrier an invitation to creativity. In trying to make romance public, predictable, and profitable, Venice accidentally created the greatest love stories, not the approved matches that followed every protocol, but the rebellions that risked everything for a feeling that couldn't be negotiated, documented, or shamed away. As the stars begin their nightly performance above the lagoon, you understand that Venice's dating spectacle was never really about control. It was about fear, fear of the chaos love brings, the way it ignores social hierarchies, laughs at careful plans, and transforms sensible people into romantic fools. Every committee meeting, every public contract, every elaborate rule was civilization's attempt to tame the untamable. And every genuine smile between lovers, every secret letter, every couple who chose exile over separation proved the beautiful futility of that attempt. The city sleeps now, its bridges empty of strutting suitors, its balconies dark. Tomorrow, the whole elaborate dance begins again. The negotiations, the serenades, the careful choreography of desire made public. But tonight, in the quiet spaces between the ancient stones, love moves according to its own tides, as unstoppable as the water that keeps Venice afloat, and just as likely to find its way through every barrier humans can devise. Sweet dreams. And remember, whether in Renaissance Venice or your own time, love remains the most public of private acts, the most serious of games, and the most enduring rebellion against any system that tries to contain it. The spectacle continues, but the heart knows its own rules, and always has. Even in a city that thought it could write better ones,